A proud black Marine walks into his son's graduation, only to be told he doesn't belong. Two security guards try to escort him out, but then the doors swing open, and 6 Navy SEALs march in. What happens next silences the entire room, and leaves everyone questioning what respect really looks like. You won't believe how this graduation turned into a moment the school would never forget. The soft notes of pomp and circumstance echoed through the packed school auditorium. Proud families clutched flower bouquets, balloons bobbed above heads, and phone cameras were already recording every second. Graduation was supposed to be a celebration, a day of honor, legacy, and achievement. But for one man, that day began with disrespect. If you love stories where the underestimated rise and justice hits hard, don't just watch. Join. The VIP fam. Hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications, because here, we don't just tell stories. We drop moments that change everything. Master Sergeant David Cole stood at the back of the auditorium, silently taking in the scene. He was a mountain of a man, tall, poised, built from over 2 decades of military service. His uniform was flawless, United States Marine Corps dress blues, polished brass buttons, his chest decorated with ribbons earned from 22 years of loyalty, sacrifice, and courage. His boots clicked against the floor as he walked, echoing louder than the music. People turned, some out of curiosity, others out of confusion. Most had never seen that many medals on one chest. He wasn't just a Marine. He was the Marine. A man who had seen more in war zones than most people could imagine in a lifetime. Today, though, he wasn't here for war. He was here for love. His son, Malik Cole, was graduating, not just with honors, but as valedictorian of the senior class. David had missed birthdays, holidays, and school plays during deployments. He wasn't about to miss this. As David approached the reserved, front row seating, typically saved for immediate family, 2 school security guards stepped forward. One guard, a younger man with a security badge pinned half-crooked to his vest, held out a hand. "Excuse me, sir. This section is for invited guests only." David stopped, confused. "I was invited," he said calmly, gesturing to the ticket in his hand. "My son is graduating top of his class. I'm his father." The second guard, an older man with a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, gave him a long look. Not at the ticket, but at his face, his skin, his uniform, the way he looked. "We've had some issues with crowding," the older guard said coldly. "We'll have to ask you to move to general seating, sir. We can't make exceptions." David kept his composure. He didn't raise his voice, didn't flash his medals. He had faced more threatening men with less arrogance. "I served 22 years in the United States Marine Corps," he said, his voice even. "I've got clearance to walk into the Pentagon without being stopped, and you're telling me I can't sit in a high school auditorium to see my own son?" A few heads turned. People nearby were starting to pay attention. One mother whispered to her daughter. A man a few rows back began recording with his phone. The younger guard shifted uncomfortably. "It's not personal, sir. We're just following protocol." David tilted his head. "Then your protocol needs work." Still, the guards didn't move. "We'll have to ask you to leave if you don't cooperate," the older one said more forcefully now, puffing up slightly as if preparing for a confrontation. That's when the murmurs began. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A man in uniform, a hero, being told to leave? Some people watched in awkward silence. Others looked away, pretending not to notice. No one stood up. Not yet. David took a slow breath. He wasn't here to start a scene. He was here for Malik, but the disrespect was loud, visible, and it cut deeper than any bullet he'd ever faced. All around him, proud parents were getting ready to watch their children walk across that stage. But right now, a father who had bled for his country was being treated like he didn't belong, not because of his actions, but because of who he was and how he looked. And the stage was about to get a new kind of spotlight. From the stage, Malik Cole stood frozen, clutching his valedictorian speech in trembling hands. He was seconds away from the biggest moment of his young life. But now, all he could see was his father being humiliated in front of hundreds of people. The joy in the room had evaporated. The crowd, once buzzing with pride and excitement, now sat in stunned silence as whispers began to spread like wildfire. That's his dad? Why are they stopping him? Isn't that a Marine uniform? Malik's eyes locked onto his father's. David stood tall, unmoving, but Malik knew that face, the calm mask he wore in moments of deep pain or disappointment. The boy's throat tightened. His father had risked his life for strangers in deserts and jungles across the world. Now he was being told he didn't belong in the front row of a high school auditorium. Just as Malik opened his mouth ready to step off the stage, the back doors of the auditorium swung open with a low creak. The music stopped, heads turned. Phones lifted. 6 figures entered, one after the other, each in crisp navy dress blues, dark uniforms adorned with golden buttons, silver insignias, and gleaming service pins that caught the auditorium lights. They moved as one, in tight formation, their boots pounding the polished floor like a war drum. Every step was precise, deliberate, heavy. These were not just guests. These were warriors, SEALs. They walked directly toward David, flanking him in a protective arc. It was a scene straight from a military send-off, but here it looked like a silent protest in motion. The crowd didn't know what to make of it. Some stood. Others gasped. One of the SEALs, a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair and a face like granite, stepped forward. Commander Ellis. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was sharp and clear as a rifle shot. He's with us. The words cut through the tension like a blade. Even the guards who had puffed up moments ago suddenly shrank back like rookies caught out of line. The older security guard, flustered and wide-eyed, stammered, Who are you people?" Ellis didn't blink. He glanced at David, then back at the guards. "We're his team." His tone was calm but laced with something more. Command, authority, unshakable conviction. "That man right there, that's Master Sergeant David Cole. 22 years in the United States Marine Corps. Led Black Ops missions most of you will never hear about. We would not be alive if it weren't for him." The room was dead silent now. A few people gasped. One student dropped their phone. In the crowd, a teacher quietly rose to her feet. Then another. The guards stood motionless. Their arrogance dissolved into shame as they realized who they had just tried to throw out. Ellis took a step closer, voice lowering but losing none of its power. "You don't ask a man like that to leave. You don't question if he belongs. You thank him, and then you move out of his way." No one moved. The guard stepped back, eyes down, finally understanding the weight of what they had done. David didn't gloat, didn't smile. He simply nodded, to Ellis, who saluted him with quiet respect. And in that moment, Master Sergeant David Cole didn't need to speak a single word. His presence, and the men who stood by him, had said everything. The sound of nervous footsteps echoed as the school principal rushed down from the stage, the hem of her maroon blazer fluttering with every step. The tension in the auditorium was thick, so thick you could feel it pressing down on the crowd, like a weight. Principal Harmon was pale, clearly rattled by what she had just witnessed. Her face was a mixture of confusion, panic, and disbelief. The sight of 6 Navy SEALs standing in a protective arc around a stoic Marine had transformed what was supposed to be a quiet graduation ceremony into something that would soon go viral. She reached the front row and turned to the man who clearly commanded the room now. "Commander Ellis, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice tight and breathy. "What's going on here?" Commander Ellis turned his steely eyes toward her, unimpressed by the question. He took a slow breath before replying, not with aggression, but with calm, razor-sharp clarity. "No, Principal Harmon. Everything is not all right." He turned slightly and gestured toward David, who stood tall and silent, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes forward. "Posture straight, the very image of disciplined dignity. You just embarrassed a national hero in front of this entire school." There was a beat of silence. The principal blinked. I didn't know. I wasn't informed," she began. But Ellis cut her off, not rudely, but with the firm tone of someone used to speaking truth to power. "You shouldn't need a press release to show someone basic respect. That man is Master Sergeant David Cole, United States Marine Corps. He's led classified rescue missions in enemy territory. He's trained elite special ops. He's stood between danger and freedom more times than we can count. His voice grew firmer. The six of us standing here, we owe our lives to him, every one of us. Gasps spread through the room. Students turned to whisper. Parents looked down, suddenly ashamed they hadn't stood up earlier. Principal Harmon's eyes widened. She looked at David, really looked at him for the first time. And what she saw shook her. She didn't see a man trying to sneak into a seat. She saw a warrior, a protector, a father. "I had no idea," she whispered, tears starting to rim her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Master Sergeant. Please, you're welcome to sit wherever you'd like." But David still said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was more powerful than any speech. His medals, his composure, the men standing beside him. They spoke for him. His honor had already spoken. Commander Ellis stepped back and gave David a respectful nod, silently asking if he wanted to sit or walk away. David looked around the auditorium, not with anger, but with quiet grace, and finally took his seat in the front row. This time, no one stopped him. One by one, people began to rise to their feet. It started in the front, then the middle, then the back. First a few scattered claps, then a wave, the yay. Auditorium erupted in a standing ovation, not for the school, not for the principal, not even for the graduation, but for him, Master Sergeant David Cole. And still, he didn't smile. He simply nodded, as if to say, "I'm not here for applause. I'm here for my son." The 6 Navy SEALs remained standing behind him, heads high, guarding not just their commander, but a symbol of honor that had been nearly trampled by prejudice and protocol. The silence broke first with the sound of the principal's voice, shaky, barely above a whisper, as if the weight of what had just happened had finally landed on her shoulders. She turned toward David Cole, eyes wide, her face flushed with embarrassment. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her blazer. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said, barely meeting his eyes. "Please sit anywhere you'd like. The front row is yours." David gave her a simple nod. Nothing more. Not out of spite. But because. That's all that needed to be said. Then he turned and walked slowly toward the front row. His stride was steady, his head high. The sharp click of his boots against the floor echoed through the auditorium like a metronome counting down to something. Something no one expected. He had barely reached the aisle when a sound broke through the tension. Clap. One person stood. A young mother holding a bouquet rose from her seat, her eyes glistening. She clapped slowly, deliberately. Then another person rose behind her, an elderly grandfather who placed a hand over his heart. Then another, a teacher, a student. One by one, like dominoes tipping over, the entire auditorium stood. Clap, clap, clap. A full standing ovation erupted, not polite, not routine, but raw, thunderous. It rolled through the hall like a storm of gratitude and shame, regret and respect. Every hand that clapped was an apology. Every pair of eyes now locked on David with a new understanding. And for the first time in many years, years of deployments, salutes, folded flags, and missed birthdays, David Cole felt something unexpected, seen not just as a Marine, not just as a decorated war hero, not even as a man in a uniform that commanded respect, but as a father, as a black man who had given so much to his country, and had almost been turned away from his son's most important day because of what he looked like. David's eyes scanned the room, his jaw tight, trying to hold back the flood of emotion rising in his chest. His discipline had been forged through war and hardship, but nothing had prepared him for this, to be honored not for what he did overseas, but for who he was, right here at home. Malik stood frozen on the stage, blinking back tears. His notes trembled in his hands. All the words he had written about leadership, perseverance, and gratitude suddenly felt small compared to what he had just seen. His father, his hero, had just shown the world what real strength looked like. And not with fists, not with weapons, but with dignity, with grace, with silence. Malik wiped his eyes and glanced up at the sea of people now standing for his father. For their story, this graduation wasn't just about diplomas anymore. It had become something more, a moment that would be remembered not just by the Cole family, but by every soul in that auditorium. Cell phones were still recording, cameras were still rolling, but what mattered most wasn't what would go viral, it was the healing that had begun in that room. David finally sat, surrounded by the 6 Navy SEALs, who remained standing, a silent wall of honor behind him. Malik stepped up to the podium, heart pounding, throat tight. He looked directly at his father and smiled through his tears. "Before I begin my speech," he said, voice breaking slightly, "I just want to say one thing. That man right there is the reason I know what strength looks like." The crowd erupted again, louder this time, because now they weren't just clapping for a student. They were clapping for a son, and the father who had always shown up, even when the world tried to push him aside. Malik stood at the podium, his notes resting in front of him untouched. He stared at them for a moment, then slowly folded them in half and set them aside. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was clear as he leaned into the microphone. "I was going to talk about grades and goals," he began, his voice echoing through the now silent auditorium. "But now, I want to talk about something more important." The room was still with respect, still with anticipation. Malik turned slightly and pointed toward the front row. His father, Master Sergeant David Cole, sat there, flanked by 6 Navy SEALs in full-dress uniform, each of them standing, like sentinels. "That man is my hero." There was a pause, and then a ripple of applause. But Malik wasn't finished. "He's taught me what strength looks like, and not the kind you see in movies or on TV, the kind of strength that comes from sacrifice, from discipline, from walking into rooms where people don't want you, and holding your head high anyway." He took a breath, and you could feel it, the emotion starting to swell in his chest. "He's taught me that sometimes being quiet is louder than shouting, that the most powerful people in the world don't need to prove anything, because they've already proven it through action, through loyalty, through love." The audience leaned in, silent, hanging on every word. "He's taught me to walk with purpose, to speak with courage, and to never, ever let anyone tell me I don't belong." The crowd erupted in applause, louder this time. Several students wiped away tears. Parents nodded. Teachers sat in stunned silence. Malik looked out across the crowd and continued, eyes burning with conviction. "Today, my father was almost turned away from this ceremony, not because he did anything wrong, but because some people still see a black man and assume he doesn't belong. Well, let me be clear. My father has stood in places most of us would never dare. He's protected people who never even knew his name. And yet, right here, in his own community, he had to be defended by his team just to sit in a chair." The air was heavy. Malik's voice didn't waver. "If you ever forget his name, just remember the 6 Navy SEALs who walked into this room like a wall of truth and reminded everyone what real respect looks like." He pointed at the SEALs. "Because real respect isn't something you give based on someone's suit or their skin or their seat. It's something you earn. In silence, in sacrifice, and in service." The auditorium thundered with applause again, this time rising to a second standing ovation. David, still seated, placed a hand over his heart. His eyes were glassy, though he blinked the tears away like a soldier who refused to cry in front of the troops, but Malik saw it, and he smiled. "I wasn't planning to say this," Malik added, looking right at his dad, "but today taught me more than any class or textbook ever could." He turned back to the microphone. "To the students here, today, remember this moment, because one day, someone might try to tell you you're not good enough, that you don't belong, that you don't look the part, and when that day comes, think about who you are and who you come from. I come from a man who fought wars, who trained heroes, who walks with quiet pride, and who was nearly told he couldn't sit with the other parents. But look at him now." He gestured to the front row again. Not just sitting in the front row, but commanding it. Laughter, cheers, applause. Malik had the room in the palm of his hand. My father never asked for applause. He never asked to be treated like royalty. All he wanted was to be there for me. And he was. He took a deep breath and finished. So today I graduate not just with honors, but with pride. Because I carry his name. I carry his lessons. And I'll carry this moment with me for the rest of my life. There was a beat of silence. Then, the room exploded with cheers, not just clapping, but roaring. People wept. People hugged. Even the principal, still red-faced, stood and clapped with the rest. David finally stood, and this time he nodded to his son, just a nod. That's all it took, because in that moment father and son both knew they hadn't just changed a room. They had changed hearts.